I'd like to just give you a few minutes to talk about how us as normal citizens, right, whether we're leaders or just members of the community at large, how can we work with the legislative branch at the state level to advance policies that will fight anti-AAPI hate?
It's a great question. Thank you for having us here on this esteemed panel. And at the end of the day, even as legislators, we're just normal citizens too, in the sense that we also see and feel the impacts of things that are happening in our community around us. We just have a further responsibility to try to do something about it. And so it's critically important that everyone that's in our respective communities or in our state and even nationally, that if you're in your community, in your neighborhood, and you see something that you feel can be improved upon, whether it's interrelations with amongst different communities and cultures, whether there's a spat of violence or crime, whatever it might be, we are here to not only hear those concerns, but to figure out a way of how to move forward. And so I would suggest, first of all, getting to know us. I think we're generally pretty approachable, and we're generally, our offices, our district offices play a critical role in being our eyes and ears in the community. And so don't hesitate. Don't feel like, by any means that we are untouchable or can't be spoken to, or at some level of government where we're not engaging at the local level. I think it's quite the contrary. We love to engage at the local level, and especially as it applies what we've seen over the past year, in particular in the surge in AAPI hate, is that it has been because of those in the community have reached out to us that we've been able to respond. That has been the critical component to allow us to do our jobs. And so get to know us, even if there's not an issue, like right now we're discussing a specific issue, but even during, quote, normal times, or there's not, come to it when we have community coffee, when we're able to open up again and have open houses and community coffees, get to know us so that we know who the trusted leaders are in the community when things do occur.
That's interesting. Assemblymember Muratsuchi, what are your
Yes, thank you for inviting me to join my colleagues. Good to see Assemblymembers Kalra and Assemblymember Low. So I represent the South Bay area of Los Angeles County, which includes large Asian and Pacific Islander communities like Torrance, Gardena, the beach cities, Palos Verdes, as well as, of course, a portion of the city of Los Angeles. And, like all of us across the country, we have seen a spike in anti-Asian hate incidents, as well as hate crimes overall. Case in point, we have a local park, Wilson Park, in the city of Torrance, where there was a woman that first assaulted and harassed a Filipino woman at the Del Amo Mall in the city of Torrance, and then she proceeded to verbally assault another Filipino woman who was just working out in Wilson Park, and then proceeded to harass yet a third group of victims. This time, a Japanese American family, a father with his children, telling them things that we've all heard before. Go back to where you came from. You're spreading the virus, and so we know that across the country we've seen this spike, over 6,600 incidents of anti-Asian hate incidents reported across the country. 2/3 directed against women. We've seen the videos of our elderly in particular. I know when I saw the video of the 84-year-old Thai gentleman in San Francisco being assaulted, for just taking his morning walk, I immediately called my parents and asked them to please be careful, watch who's around you, and it's a sad state of affairs. And so, the one bright spot that I've seen from how people have been able to make a difference ever since we've seen this spike in anti-Asian hate has been the growth in terms of the number of local incidents or local rallies that I've seen in my community and in my district. We've had 4 anti-Asian hate rallies organized in my communities, where grassroots, regular folks, families, children, elderly, everyone coming out to stand together, to speak out, and to fight back against all this hate. And we know that it's not just a problem facing Asian Americans. I mean, we've seen a dramatic spike in anti-Jewish incidents. I'm sure Assemblymember Low can also talk about the spike in anti-LGBTQ hate. And so, we all need to band together to stand up and speak out against this very disturbing trend.
Yes, indeed, we do. And Assemblymember Low, I'd like to get your thoughts on that as well. But also, because you represent obviously a part of California where a lot of the larger tech firms are based, I wonder, how their perspective kind of leans into the efforts that you make every day, especially in terms of the different caucuses that you serve on, and how you kind of go about kind of building those alliances with other groups and organizations as well.
Thank you very much, and thank you for all of you who have helped organize this event as we round out the end of May for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Let me just say this very clear. This is our time in American history for us to continually find out and ask ourselves, what will we do during this time when we see fellow Asian Pacific Islanders being victimized, assaulted, killed in our communities? What will we do during this time? What did we do? What will we do? What will we continue to do? And what will our children do? What will our children learn from us to see as role models and examples to help ensure that this does not happen again? And unfortunately, that is part of the dark history of our American history, specifically, whether or not it's the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, or even here in California, the California Alien Land Law of 1913, which prohibited Asian Pacific Islanders from owning property, or that of Who Killed Vincent Chin, and that of the Japanese internment, that of the Muslim ban. We see this time and time again. And by the way, we also must recognize the importance of why we must march and demonstrate solidarity with Black lives and the Black Lives Matter, and speaking out on the anniversary of the murder of George Floyd and the social justice that is so required of us. And when we talk about these things, let us also talk about the difficult conversations about addressing our own racism in our own communities. We know it. We know individuals who demonstrate that when they share these conversations. But how do we then try to take a step back to say we are stronger together? Let us talk about difficult conversations about race, about how we share power in an American democracy and in society, while also helping to make policy changes about how we can address the systemic racism in all sectors of our society. With respect to corporate America, that Asian Pacific Islanders, for example, in Silicon Valley consist of close to 40% of the population. And yet we do not have the adequate representation in the C-suites of corporate boards in corporate America. So what do we need to do to help change that conversations? Not by empty rhetoric or tokenism, but saying, why is it important? And by the way, it shouldn't just always just be about Asian Pacific Islanders, but that we also must speak in June for LGBT Pride Month, because we see so many of our friends and fellow Americans who are suffering, those who can be fired for being who they are, those who feel discriminated, stigma by choosing a bathroom, or being discriminated against by being who they truly are, being denied health access for identifying for the gender that they best believe in. So these are all the key criteria that I think are so important for us to acknowledge and address, especially in this moment. So again, let us not just use this month of May as Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month, or during these hate crimes, but rather the long journey that we have ahead of us by, number one, recognizing who's to be held to account. Because when we say that we see these problems, well, what do we do? And who do we demand justice from? Well, we need to know who our elected officials are. We need to know who they are. And by the way, we need to also run for office. Yes, culturally, Asian Pacific Islanders don't typically get into politics. I too was supposed to become a doctor, lawyer, or an engineer. Mr. Muratsuchi and Mr. Kalra, they did do some of that, but they're also putting their areas of expertise into advocacy. So that's why I think if you're watching today, think about what you can do to help make the creative change yourself. Not wait for someone else to do it, but take it upon yourself, because it is your duty as an active citizen in this country.
Absolutely, and I'm reminded, Assemblymember Low, another project that I'm helping out on, and you made a really good point in when you talked about how a lot of times AAPIs, they kind of step back and say, well, it's not our communities, right? It's not us being attacked, and I think you made it very, very clear. Said, look, it may not be you right now, but it's going to be you in the future. And so what does that mean? That means, us as a community need to step forward, not just on our own behalf, but on behalf of others as well, like Black Lives Matter, like these other communities that have been marginalized for so long. We need to build alliances and to build together, because that will create a better policy outcomes for everybody. So I appreciate that. Assemblymember Muratsuchi, I want to ask you as well. How do you feel members of the community or really, the law enforcement community, how can public safety, the community at large, and the assembly and at the legislative level, how can those three elements work together to come up with policy subscriptions that may not already be in place here in California, despite the fact that obviously we're a pretty progressive state in terms of public safety? Like how would we be able to kind of merge and marry all that together to come up with some good policy outcomes?
Yeah, well, thank you, Van. I'm right in the thick of a heated debate going on within the Asian American community about how best to fight back against all this hate. Not only being directed against the APIs, but also against so many other communities. And just focusing on the API community, there's a real split. There are some people who are saying that we need to more aggressively police and to investigate and prosecute these perpetrators of hate. And then there are others who are saying that you shouldn't report these incidents to the police. That we should be addressing the root causes of hate crimes and the root causes of hate, and not contributing to the further mass incarceration of too many people of color. And so, this debate is taking place within my proposal, my bill that I'm working on with my colleagues in the legislature, Assembly Bill 557, which is a bill to propose to establish a California statewide toll-free hate crimes hotline, as well as a online reporting portal, so that not just APIs, but Jews, LGBTQ, Latinos, African Americans. I mean, any victims of hate we can make it as easy, as safe as possible to report these hate incidents, so that we can have more data-driven policy solutions to address this hate. But even within this proposal, I'm getting pushback from Asian American civil rights organizations saying that, well, these hate crime hotlines and portals should not be housed within the California Department of Justice, because that can lead to information being shared with law enforcement, but rather it should be these hotlines and these reporting portals, similar to the highly successful effort with the Stop AAPI Hate, that it be housed with community-based organizations, where more people that would have the comfort level to, especially those that may be reluctant to interact with law enforcement. We know that many of our Asian immigrants, are reluctant to interact with law enforcement, that they would feel more comfortable to report with these community-based organizations rather than the Department of Justice. So that's part of the conversation that we're having within the Asian and Pacific Islander communities as to how to best fight back against this hate.
Oh, that's great. Thank you so much, Assemblymember. Hopefully that bill will make it through the processes that it needs to, and really play a part in really stopping some of these things that are happening. And look, I think it does feel like information, is really, in a lot of ways, it's kind of the linchpin as to really how to fight these things, right? I mean, if we don't know what's going on, if we don't know where it's happening, how can we really respond to it, and how can we respond to it in a thoughtful way that will benefit the community at large, but also provide opportunities for there to be learning, for there to be new experiences where people can understand, okay, this way of thinking is completely wrong, and I understand now why. why that is. So we really appreciate that. So Assemblymember Kalra, so wanted to ask you a little, and hopefully you can expand on this one. So in the state, there are obviously a lot of hate crime legislation that is passed at the assembly level. Our current AG, our previous AG has really had a really strong commitment to enforcing these existing laws, and we have information in different languages, and of course other commitments from electeds up and down the state, and really across the spectrum to fight anti-API hate. But that being said, there's still incidents happening, and there's still very serious incidents happening. And in your view, are there other legislative fixes that are not being considered, or that maybe have been kind of on the back burner, or other ways that at the state level there are ways to kind of fight there, to close the gaps in some of these situations?
Yeah, ultimately, when you look at hate crime legislation, you look at policies, criminal justice policy, having more punishment by itself doesn't usually deter conduct. And that's where, to Assemblymember Muratsuchi's point, the debate that occurs oftentimes when you have a spike in certain types of crimes, and in this case, obviously, we're talking about the anti-API hate. And the reality is that we've got to balance it. And in fact, even in the budget requests that I think a lot of us in the API caucus certainly have supported, a lot of the resources we're asking for isn't for more policing. It's actually to go to community-based organizations to help to unite communities together. Because ultimately, at the end of the day, that's really how we get past this moment. Because this moment is not unique. It's part of a long journey that we've had as a nation, where we've seen rooted in white supremacy. You've seen anti-API legislation. You've seen it to the point that was made that not everyone trusts the police. Well, that's because of generations of the police not necessarily being there during different parts of our history for different communities. And so I think it's really important that we dig deeper than simply the knee-jerk reaction of, well, let's just have harsher penalties and let's just have more policing, even though obviously on a case-by-case basis, if someone is assaulted, yes, then there should be an arrest and there should be a prosecution. I don't think anyone is saying that shouldn't be the case. But in the long term, how do we actually create more understanding? Because what happens oftentimes when we have these kinds of incidents that occur is that you'll see efforts to divide the communities and to divide us, and so to pit the API community against the Black community or the Latino, whatever it might be. This is very common. It's happened throughout the history of our nation. And we have to recognize that just like anti-API prejudice is rooted in long-standing white supremacy in this nation, so is anti-Blackness. And so is anti-immigrant sentiment, so is anti-LGBTQ sentiment. And so I think the more we recognize and take a mirror to ourselves as Americans and realize that we all play a role in breaking that down, that's where we can bring everyone together, API, Black, white, Latino, indigenous communities, and say, okay, let's look at ourselves as Americans. I think we get taught a history of American exceptionalism, like somehow we are a very moral and socially, we've always done the right thing. And it's very far from the truth. It doesn't mean that we cannot aspire to be a great nation and to continue to become better, because clearly where we are in 2021 is better than we were 200 years ago or 150 years ago, right? I mean, it's a march towards, the civil rights movement was a huge step forward. And I think that the more we recognize that not everything can be solved with legislation, but rather legislation or legislators can be there to help facilitate the community uniting together, I think that is a direction that we need to really focus on. And we are, I think as a API caucus, as a legislature, we are definitely looking at community-based solutions through this current crisis that we're facing.
Thank you so much. And I want to bounce off that. And Assemblymember, I'd like to ask you. So in California, as I mentioned earlier, there obviously we have quite a decent amount of legislation that's kind of focused on stopping hate. What, in your view, what are some of the policy prescriptions that have been adopted in California that you feel could benefit other states? So, for example, we had the situation a few months ago where this young white person decides to shoot a number of people of Asian descent in Georgia, right? And and these are just women that are just trying to to build for their families and trying to make buy in America. But like what's been done in California that you feel can help in other states, fight this at the maybe more granular level than maybe even the federal legislation that was just passed.
I think my colleagues referenced it well, which is that I think there's a gut response about potential oversimplification on these issues. And that's the danger, that there's a quick cause and effect, and that we're going to come up with a legislative response to specifically increase penalties or more policing. When in fact, I think it's important that when we talk about policing, for example, I think our API community could benefit from having, for example, more Asian Pacific Islander qualified, trained police officers, because there's a sense of trust and their communities to be accessible, to speak the language, cultural competency. And we've done much of that in what we've referenced as post-training, training for police officers in the state of California, not just for ethnic communities, but also the LGBT community. We know that specifically, when you talk about the hate incidents versus hate crimes, a number of our community members feel afraid of actually reporting to law enforcement because of cultural reasons. And frankly, a lot of them just want to live and just keep quiet, do to themselves, run their small business and not cause any trouble. And they don't want any retaliation. That's the fact. So how do we ensure that we recognize some of the systemic challenges to our community specifically, while also trying to address the underlying cause of these crimes about food insecurity, access to affordable, truly affordable housing, educational opportunities, and that when we think about criminal justice and the systems that we have, that individuals get the type of treatment that we don't just lock them up and then spit them right back out, but that we get the type of treatment, the mental health treatment, job placement, that we can't just spit them out and then have a stain on the record and then have all of the employers saying, well, I don't want that individual. And that's what we've done in the state of California to rectify the tough on crime and setting up our individuals for failure and not success once they've served their time. So I think I would highlight that, which is that we are taking a very surgical approach in the state of California. We need to be cautious about it as well, but looking at how we can rectify the injustices in our criminal justice system while also uplifting on a wide variety of different areas, because we cannot talk about criminal justice without talking about all these other issues about access to affordable housing, education, healthcare, the things that we yearn for to become productive Americans and everyday Californians. That's the American dream. So when we think about previous generations, we've come so far away from that. When we think about 1960, education was free because we had the California Higher Education Master Plan in 1960, which was free, that provided my immigrant grandparents from putting 4 children through school, just working in a cannery and at a Chinese restaurant. Whereas today, that can't happen. In the region of California, many of them, one needs to earn close to $275,000 to afford a home in their communities. That is unacceptable. So how do we ensure that we are tackling all these societal issues? So again, when we talk about Asian hate and just criminal justice, we have to talk about these other underlying issues as well.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So I'm going to tee this up for anyone to answer, and then we'll move to a closing. But so for our assembly members, our student assembly members on the line here, we have viewers kind of from all across the country, and some may not really understand some of the powers that the legislature has above and beyond passing legislation. So I'd like for everyone just to speak briefly on, what other tools as a legislature or as a legislator do you have to affect change at this level, whether it's at the state level or maybe even just within the more local community that you represent? And I'll leave it open to anybody to start.
I would say that we have an amplified voice. Earlier I said that we're like normal citizens, but the reality is we're not. We do have an amplified voice. We respectfully represent about 500,000 people. And so it's critical that we use that voice. And we're also at an interesting level of government at a state assembly level where we have our local leaders, city council members, county supervisors, sheriff's departments, what have you, and then we have our Congress and federal leaders in DC. So we're actually we're really a connector in many ways to both really sharing our thoughts and views on what can be done more federally in terms of federal policy. Hey, this is what California is doing. We want to share this federally through our Congress members and senators and say, this is something that we can expand and can work around the country. But also, if things are happening nationally, we can take those examples and bring them back down to our local levels as well. So I think that not only can we do statewide policy and budgeting to support programs, but we have the opportunity to really influence policy broadly at the local level as well, because a lot of really good policy either starts or is really piloted at the local level. So if we think that we might have a good idea, maybe the city of Los Angeles or San Jose or what have you can try it out. And then we have the opportunity to really get grassroots feedback. And so I think that as legislators, we have an enormous opportunity. And that goes the same with legislators around the country to really value and understand the privilege you have and the voice you have to speak up and to actually do something.
This is Maki, and I'm sorry to interrupt this very lively conversation, but we have a Q&A. Chris Galago is asking, what can ordinary citizens do to support our legislators to affect change in policies?
I can start off. I spoke with a group of big firm lawyers last week, and they were asking the same question. I mean, what can they do to affect change? What can they do, especially more specifically, to fight back against all this hate? And we started talking about how it's just so important for every single one of us, whether we're legislators or whether we're lawyers or school teachers or parents, whatever, that we all not just do what perhaps too many Asians have done in the past, which is just work hard, get good grades, get good jobs, and not make a lot of noise. This anti-Asian hate trend has really highlighted that no matter how hard we work, no matter how much we may achieve in our careers, in the eyes of the haters, we're just a chink or a Jap or whatever, and so I think this has really highlighted the importance of each and every one of us to speak out, to get involved in their local communities, to fight back against this hate.
Thank you so much, Assemblymember. I have a question coming in from New York City for Assemblymember Low. Hi, I'm coming in from New York City, and we're very concerned about all of the news regarding Andrew Yang. A representative from the NAACP said that the cartoon that depicted him as a foreigner was not racist. Do you feel that it's racist? And if so, what can we do as a community to raise our voices against this?
Thank you. I'm not familiar with the article or the depiction that was referenced, but nonetheless, what I can speak to is that with the candidacy of Andrew Yang vying as one of the front runners in the largest American city, naturally will come with some of the hesitations of and challenges of being the first in that community. What is fair game is on policy positions that we all, frankly, even my colleagues and I, we share different policy positions. We probably share different policy positions with our respective spouses and significant others, but that's okay. That's part of our democracy. But what is not okay is that we throw the type of aspersions and critique individuals based upon the type of xenophobia that exists. And of course, Andrew Yang cannot run away from his own identity. He is openly Asian. He is running as one of the highest profile openly Asian candidates in the largest American city. So of course it comes with some of the challenges. And I'm remiss by and reminded about this conversation. I'm hosting a town hall with my uncle Norm Mineta and Uncle Mike Honda. And what Norm Mineta would always reference is that he felt like he was a nail sticking out of a piece of wood and as the first. And what happens to that nail is like that hammer that pounds him down because you're sticking out as the first. And I always remember him using that quote, but I referenced that similarly to Andrew Yang and frankly, so many of us. And I hope that while, for example, Ash Kalra is the first to be elected in the California State Legislature of Indian descent, we know that he is not the last, and he's working hard, and we all are working hard to make sure, by the way, that our AAPI community is not monolithic and that we must represent and uplift all communities as well, whether it be women, LGBT, whether it be Armenian, whether it be from everywhere, that we are strengthened by the diversity that we have in our society.
I'd like to thank everyone that was on this panel. I think you brought up some wonderful points that, you know, we should all consider, and that we're all in this together, and that we should make allies with the different communities, and that we should all try together to help each other in this effort. So for all of you legislators, I want to thank you for Van Taman, our moderator, for Rostrum, the one who put this together, and for Maki Shea for all her efforts. Thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you've done. Thank you.